Hello, bonjour, ciao, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Tolu and I am a first year medical student who thought it would be a good idea to start making videos about her journey into becoming a doctor. And with saying that, I wanted to offer out some tips and tricks on what you should and shouldn't do, as well as what you could do with your medical application. A lot of people have actually reached out to me about their concerns in regards to their work experience or volunteering work being cancelled, and I just wanted to put out that the vast majority, if not all people, are going to be in the same position as you, so please don't be too worried. All you can do is just work around this issue until it resolves itself, and the thing is, we don't know when that will be, so just try your best to sort of work around COVID-19, I guess. But this is why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to give you guys some potential things that you could be doing to boost your medicine applications despite not having work experience and voluntary work scheduled for the next few weeks, months, etc. The first thing that I want to suggest that you guys do, if you haven't started doing it already, is to read some books. The books available that are in regards to medicine or the healthcare industry are immense. There are so many of them, and plus you get to see the perspectives of doctors and other healthcare professionals, as well as insight into other things within the industry but you may not have seen if you were to do work experience yourself. There are books available that talk about doctors' own personal experiences within the industry. An example of this is Confessions of a GP by Dr. Benjamin Daniels, where he describes the patients he's come into contact with, the weird scenarios he's had to face when it comes to diagnosing people, as well as his general experiences of being a doctor. And I think for me personally, reading someone else's experience is actually something really good to reflect on, so you can sort of kind of figure out an idea for yourself as to what things you could expect as a doctor, or potentially what things to sort of look out for to help reassure you when you get into that stage. Another great example that I actually personally read and put in my personal statement was Oliver Sacks's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Now, this book is mainly related to neuroscience and neurology, and it focuses a lot on patient cases that our good old guy Oliver Sacks encountered, and how he sort of led himself to diagnose particular patients with some certain like neurological conditions. So I personally really like this book because it's in regards to a field that I want to go into. So if there are any books available and that you think will be similar to what, let's say, industry you want to get into in the future, then I'd say definitely go and have a read for it. And it's so important to be able to reflect on what you've read as well, so have an open mind for that too. There are some books that even have a little dash of emotion in them, and when I tell you, it's so important to realise that although within a doctor you have to really heavily depend on your scientific knowledge and your skill set, one thing that's very, very important to have is also empathy as well as sympathy for your patient, because you want to be able to build a connection with your patient so that they trust you and so that they're comfortable with interacting with you. And in doing so, you become a better doctor and you develop into a better person. So being able to understand why it's important to be empathetic, why it's important to be understanding of your patient's feelings, something that it's really handy to have. And there are a lot of books available that sort of teach you how people have done that, and it helps to shift your perspective on how you should view a doctor. And an amazing example of this personally is When Breath Becomes Air. I've only ever cried reading one book, and it was this book. This book basically details the life of Dr. Kalanithi. I apologise if I butchered his name. And it just talks about his perspective being a doctor and then certain situations occurring within his life that end up in him resulting to being a patient. So you get to see his journey throughout his career, and it's such a valuable read in case you ever do come across it. And it just helps to put things into perspective. It helps to bring you down to earth and realise that empathy is so important, and as a doctor those sorts of feelings are very much valued. So again, through reading that book you can gain a lot of information and gain a lot of insight into how to treat people and how to go about your own life when you interact with other patients as well. There are actually also some books that just literally teach you about some sciences and go into detail about particular conditions or genetics, and one good example of this is How We Live and Why We Die by Lewis Wolpert. And this book literally just goes into detail about cells and life essentially. But it's really good to be able to read books because it helps develop and build up your knowledge. And yeah, I just really encourage you to go into reading if you haven't done so already. There are so many other books available, like The Selfish Gene. There's also really interesting books that touch upon medical ethics, which is what I want to go into next, because alongside having sympathy and empathy for your patients, understanding medical ethics is also very, very important. Within medicine, we have the 4 pillars of medical ethics, which are autonomy, benevolence, non-maleficence, and justice. And it's so important to have in your mind what all of those pillars represent, because they will influence a lot of your actions if you do become a doctor or anyone else within the healthcare industry. A lot of books are available as well that touch upon different types of medical ethics and how to approach particular problems and conditions, which is what I sort of think is really important to sort of understand or start to understand now. An example of this is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which touches upon a woman called Henrietta Lacks whose cells have now been used for lots and lots of research. However, there were implications where the cells were not used with her family's permission, or they haven't received much compensation for it, etc. But I think it's so valuable to be able to look into things and how some actions could be seen as good, some could be seen as bad, and just to learn from it. If you don't want to read a necessarily really big fat book on medical ethics or other medical subjects, the Oxford University Press release books that are called A Very Short Introduction, which are little mini books that sort of help quickly summarize or just discuss particular topics without having them being lengthy novels. So there's also an example in relation to medical ethics, which is called Medical Ethics, A Very Short Introduction, and it's very interesting, and it gives a lot of insight into medical ethics. There are also other books available within A Very Short Introduction to series in regards to medicine that I encourage you to read. So if I haven't made it clear enough, I definitely really urge you to read some books. There are so many available if you just look on Amazon, and there's a nifty website that I use as well called World of Books that sells really good quality secondhand books or secondhand items that I get a lot of my books from. Or if you know anyone else who has some books, they could potentially hand it down to you. And yeah, continuing on with the topic of reading, not only could you read books, but there are also quite a few scientific journals available that you could read online. This includes the BMA Student Journal, journals from researchers, etc., which you should be able to find online. Some may require a subscription, but before you take out cash by yourself, check with your schools to see if they have a subscription that they could offer out to you or that could give you access to these resources. It's really important to keep up to trend with current things that are going on with the world, and journals are a really great way to do that. Alongside with getting up to date with things in the world, watch the news. As we all know, we are currently living through a global pandemic, so it's not new to say that you could try and keep up to date with what's happening. What methods have the government been using to try and combat this issue? Are there any medical concerns, for example access to PPE, that people could be reading about? Why are BAME doctors and nurses and other people more at risk of contracting the disease or potentially dying from it? What are the implications of the disease? So for example, what symptoms could arise? Think about what interesting things you see in the news, what you see in articles, and just develop it from there, and just give yourself a little bit more insight into what's happening, because as a doctor, a future doctor, you yourself could find yourself in a situation like this as well. So think of it as sort of prep work and just expanding your knowledge on this topic. Having said that, a lot of the times the news can be quite saddening and upsetting, so please don't excessively look at it and try to avoid consistently focusing on bad news, because it can lead to detrimental effects to your mental health. So on that topic, look at it at your discretion. Because we are on lockdown and you can't necessarily go out as often as you usually would, in order to keep yourself busy alongside your schoolwork, try and come up with a project that you could be doing. So something similar to what is called EPQ. So instead of actually doing an EPQ project, you could literally just do a little bit more research into a topic that you're interested in, and use the facilities that I've mentioned previously. So books that you've read and journals that you've read and news articles that you've seen. And on top of that, you could also look into videos, lectures, etc., and do a little bit of research on this specific topic. Maybe even make an essay on this topic, give yourself a title and answer it, and then you could even potentially put that in your personal statement, saying that you found a topic that was so interesting that you went out of your way to look a little bit more into it. So for me, I did that with neurology. You can get the trend. I kind of want to go into neurology, so a lot of my personal statement was centered around neurology. So for me, I looked into the plasticity of brains. So I read The Man Who Mistook His Life for a Hat, I read articles, I watched videos, I asked people who were sort of focused in that industry, and I came up with like a mini essay that I was able to discuss potential treatments and issues in regards to that concept. So doing things like that just shows your interest for your subject. It shows how willing you are to get to an answer, and that determination could only really help you. One thing that's also readily available now is online free courses, in particular Harvard. So Harvard has released a bunch of really cool online courses that you can sign up to. They last from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So if you wanted to pursue this, it really requires determination and hard work, as well as consistency. Work experience is a tool that people use to help develop their understanding of what it's like to be a doctor or be a healthcare professional. It puts you in the setting of a real hospital or a real GP or a real clinical setting, and a lot of times within your interviews they ask you to reflect on what you've seen and what you've experienced. And because of COVID-19, a lot of those opportunities have been cancelled and you're no longer able to do them at this moment in time. However, there are alternatives, like I said before, that can still allow you to reflect on a clinical setting. That being talking to a healthcare professional. A lot of doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals are still willing to sort of help prospective students to develop their interests within the industry. Try and reach out to them asking for their own personal experiences, maybe ask them a few questions if they're willing to. But having said this, please be mindful that they are still working, they are still trying to tackle this global pandemic. Please don't be selfish when it comes to asking for their experiences, because they are still very fundamental to tackling COVID-19. If, however, there are healthcare professionals who aren't available to answer your questions, reach out to a medical student, whether that be someone in first year up until 6th year or 5th year if they are on a 5-year course, because you can still ask them about their experiences as a medical student. If you don't know any other medical students or healthcare professionals, check out the Student Room or other platforms like LinkedIn, where you can get in contact with people in regards to this industry. Talk to one another, share your tips, work together, because literally the best way to sort of tackle the problems right now is to work alongside each other. By talking to someone else, you can reflect on things together, you can look at alternative perspectives and outlooks, because you may have had an opinion on one thing but they may have seen it from a different viewpoint. Being able to understand different perspectives is very important. So if you were to read a book and someone else read that same book, talk to them about what they found about that book, what they found interesting, what they didn't find interesting, what they learned from it. It's just so valuable to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives, because it could help with diagnosing particular conditions that have overlap in their symptoms. It could be handy when you're trying to talk to a patient about how they're feeling, so being able to understand things potentially from their viewpoint is a different perspective. So get into the habit of practicing it now, because that's a really important and handy skill to have within your career. Now, those are like the major tips that I do have, but assuming things resolve themselves in the future, you could try and rearrange your work experience and volunteering for a later date, but there is no guarantee of when that will be available to you. So one thing I want to say to you now is that although work experience and voluntary work is good to have, universities are aware that there are difficulties in obtaining work experience and volunteering. A lot of people may come from disadvantaged backgrounds, so they won't have the same opportunities as other people, and university tutors are aware of that. So at least use that to potentially reassure you. But one thing I would say is that if you do manage to get work experience arranged for a really later date, let's say if you get it for October half term, which is maybe after you're meant to hand in your UCAS applications, there's nothing to say that you still can't reflect on those situations in your interview if you were to get one. So even if you hadn't mentioned it specifically in your personal statement because you missed the deadline per se, you can still discuss it in your interview and talk about what you learned from it and what you reflected from there, because it's still something that you did. So yeah, that's always an option available for you. And it works because interviews literally could be from November to February and so on. So my first interview was the end of November and my last interview was in March. So there's literally a great scope of availability for you to be able to discuss your personal experiences with work experience volunteering if you were to get some in the future. But yeah, right now we are in some pretty weird and unprecedented times. Boy, if I had £1 for every time someone said that or emailed that to me, I would have a lot of pounds. I don't know how many, but I would have a lot of money. Life isn't like it usually is, and that is understandable. A lot of people are working remotely and are trying to readjust to this new way of life. Like me personally, I have lectures to be looking at online. I have to do tutorials via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I still have essays to be doing, and it's just weird because I'm not used to doing this at home. But we're all having to readjust to this new way of life, and yeah, I hope it reassures some of you, because as a uni student, I'm having to readjust to these things and I'm personally struggling at times. So if you feel like you're struggling yourself, don't be too upset or distraught about it, because I'm literally, I can understand how you're feeling, and I do get how you're feeling, and a lot of people will also get how you're feeling. So please reach out to someone if you want to talk. Don't suffer in silence. It could be your friends, it could be your parents, it could be your teachers from school. And if you even really wanted to, reach out to one of us, one of the StudyTubers, or someone available online that can talk to you, give you some tips, because we're here to help you. And I really valued the access to help when I was applying to medical school. Having like the tables turning for me, it's really cool. But yeah, we're literally here to help and support you, so just remember and bear that in mind if you were to ever feel low. And yeah, just reach out to support and talk to people. But I hope that some of the tips that I've mentioned in this video are helpful to you guys. In the meantime, I do urge you to also use this opportunity to sort out your academics. At the end of the day, you could have read 1 billion books or watched 100,000 lectures or done like trillions of projects and all sorts of things, but the foundation needs to be your grades. So medical schools have specific requirements, which is usually AAA depending on your social background. So use this time to make sure that your grades are up to scratch, because if you don't meet the requirements and you've done all of these amazing things, they still may not even consider you, which is kind of a harsh truth. But please still focus on your grades and your academics and make sure that they are at the level that they should be. Thank you so much for watching this video, and like I said before, I hope some of these tips are helpful to you. And I really wish you guys all of the best. Please continue to look after yourselves, keep social distancing and abiding by the guidelines given to us by the government. And yeah, that's it really. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments box below, and I'll try my best to get back to any of them. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.